For 7 days, a dog with its head trapped in a plastic bottle had been unable to eat. The animal's desperation echoed in its vacant gaze as its life slipped away with each passing, foodless hour. What happened next would defy all expectations and forever change the fate of this helpless creature. Before we begin, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and comment where you're watching from. A biting wind sliced through the morning air in São Bento do Mar, carrying the scent of the sea and the promise of a storm. Maria Costa clutched her shawl tighter against her chest as she walked along the deserted beach, her footsteps leaving fleeting imprints in the damp sand. The 65-year-old retiree was following her morning routine, seeking in the coastal solitude some relief from the grief she had carried since losing her granddaughter, Anna. It was then that her tired eyes caught a strange movement among the rocks slick with the low tide. A small, trembling shape struggled weakly, almost invisible against the gray of the stones. Maria approached with caution, her heart quickening with each step. Her eyes widened in horror when she saw it. A skeletal dog, its snout wedged completely inside a plastic bottle, fighting desperately for air. "Oh, my heavens!" she exclaimed, a knot tightening in her throat. The animal was visibly malnourished. Its ribs protruded beneath a coat of dirty, matted fur, and its eyes, nearly lifeless, pleaded for help. Without a second thought, Maria dropped her shawl on the sand and ran toward the village. Her legs, usually slow and pained, seemed rejuvenated by the urgency of the moment. She needed help, and she knew exactly who to call. "Antonio! Antonio Oliveira!" she shouted, out of breath, as she reached the door of a blue wooden house. "There's a dog dying on the beach. Its head is stuck in a bottle." Old Antonio, a retired fisherman and Maria's childhood neighbor, didn't hesitate. Within minutes, the two elderly friends were hurrying back to the beach, Antonio carrying a fishing knife and a piece of rope. "Careful not to frighten him further," he warned, as they waded into the shallow water, ignoring the icy chill that soaked their clothes. The dog tried to back away as they approached, but was too weak to escape. Maria spoke softly, whispering words of comfort she wasn't even sure the animal could understand, while her friend gently tried to immobilize the creature to remove the bottle. Maria's heart hammered violently against her ribs. What if they were too late? What if the animal died in their hands? A familiar sense of powerlessness washed over her, reminding her of when she couldn't save her granddaughter. But this time, it had to be different. "Hold him steady," Antonio instructed, carefully maneuvering the knife. "We'll get it, Maria. We're going to save this poor little thing." The waves crashed against their legs. The wind blew harder, but none of it mattered. In that moment, all that existed was the desperate hope of giving an abandoned animal a chance to live. The plastic bottle was wedged tight around the dog's snout, and every move Maria Costa and Antonio Oliveira made to remove it drew sharp whimpers from the animal. The waves broke against their legs, soaking their clothes to the knees as they struggled to keep their balance on the slippery rocks. "Easy, little one," Maria whispered, her trembling hands trying to find an angle that wouldn't hurt the dog further. The sharp scent of the sea mingled with a sickly sweet smell wafting from inside the bottle. Remnants of soda, perhaps, that had lured the starving animal into this unintentional trap. Antonio held the dog's thin, trembling body while Maria worked to free the plastic. "Watch out for his teeth, Maria," her neighbor warned, his voice nearly lost in the sound of waves crashing relentlessly against the rocks. The morning sun reflected off the water, making it difficult to see. Maria's heart ached with every one of the animal's whimpers. Her hands were being cut by the sharp edges of the plastic, but she didn't feel the pain. The urgency of the situation intensified everything. The taste of salt on her lips, the sweat dripping down her forehead, the dog's shallow breathing. "Almost there," she murmured, finally finding a point where the plastic gave way. With a careful motion, she managed to widen the opening for just enough to begin sliding the bottle off. The dog let out one last howl of pain as the object finally came free. For a moment, the animal looked at Maria with glazed eyes before collapsing onto the wet sand, exhausted and starved. Its skeletal body barely moved, save for the shallow rise and fall of its breath. "We did it," Antonio said, wiping his face, wet with sea spray and sweat. Maria knelt beside the animal, noticing the wounds around its snout, where the plastic had cut into the skin. The dog was so weak, it didn't even try to flinch when she gently touched its head. "I'll call him Mateus," she decided, remembering the patron saint of the needy her grandmother always spoke of. As she watched the listless animal, Maria felt the weight of responsibility settle on her shoulders. This wasn't just a momentary rescue. It was the beginning of a long battle. The dog would need care, food, and medicine, and she could barely support herself on her modest pension. "Let's get him to your house, Vachon," her neighbor suggested, already preparing to lift the animal. Maria nodded, knowing that despite the hardships to come, she could not abandon this creature that fate had placed in her path. The journey back home was slow and careful. Maria Costa held the dog against her chest, shielding him from the gusts of wind that battered the shore. Each of the animal's whimpers felt like a thin needle piercing her heart. When she finally crossed the threshold of her small, mud-walled home, she felt the full weight of the responsibility she had just shouldered. Gently, she wrapped the trembling animal in an old cotton blanket, the very one she had knitted for Anna years ago. The faded fabric still held memories of children's laughter and tight hugs. "I'm going to call you Mateus," she whispered, as she tried to offer him water in a ceramic bowl. The dog turned his snout away, refusing even the purest liquid, as if he had completely lost the will to live. The animal's brown eyes fixed on hers, a silent plea for help that Maria recognized immediately. It was the same vacant gaze she carried in her own eyes since losing her granddaughter. That shared pain created a silent bond between the two lonely beings. "We need to treat these wounds," she murmured to herself, searching her kitchen cabinet for her makeshift first aid kit. Her wrinkled hands trembled as she laid out worn bandages, a bottle of homemade saline, and a small bag of herbs that Donna Lourdes had given her last month. The village midwife always said her herbal mixtures could cure any ailment, whether in people or animals. Maria remembered her friend's words as she prepared a compress. "The body heals when the soul finds shelter." Perhaps that was what both she and Mateus needed, shelter in each other. With patience, she cleaned each wound, applying the medicinal herbs to the deepest cuts. The strong scent of the plants filled the small room, mingling with the aroma of the sea that clung to her clothes. Mateus whimpered softly, but didn't resist her care. It was as if he understood that these trembling hands were his only chance. As she worked, Maria felt a growing responsibility for the fate of this living being. He wasn't just an abandoned dog. He was a life that, for some mysterious reason, had crossed her path. "Maybe it's a sign," she thought, remembering the notes Anna had left behind, promising to protect those who looked after animals. "We're going to make it," she whispered in Mateus's ear, unsure if she was trying to convince the animal or herself. As night fell over São Bento do Mar, inside that simple house, two wounded hearts slowly began to find comfort in one another. In São Bento do Mar, news traveled faster than the northeasterly wind. Before the sun had fully risen, everyone knew that Maria Costa had rescued a dying dog from the rocks on the beach. The fishing nets brought in fish and stories, and this one was too special not to be shared. Dona Maria saved the little animal that had its head stuck in a bottle, the children would say, running from door to door. In the morning, a small group of boys and girls gathered at the entrance of her mud-walled home. In their hands, they carried pieces of bread, dinner leftovers, and even a little fish wrapped in a banana leaf. One of the children, barefoot and with salt-tangled hair, held out a plastic plate of rice. "My mom sent this for the little dog, Dona Maria. She said he needs to get strong." Maria smiled, moved by the gesture. She accepted each offering with gratitude as the children told her about other animals that had appeared in the village. A three-legged cat living on the pier, a turtle that Antonio Oliveira had returned to the sea, a baby owl that had fallen from its nest and was being cared for by Dona Lourdes. Inside the house, however, the situation was dire. Mateus, as she now called him, refused all food. Maria tried offering him sugar water, then a little salt to stimulate his thirst, followed by kibble she had borrowed from a neighbor. Even the dried meat, a precious treat saved for special occasions, was rejected by the animal. "Eat a little, my sweet boy," she would murmur, her heart sinking as she saw the dog's ribs become more prominent under his thin coat. 3 days passed. The animal drank only minimal amounts of water, just enough to stay alive. His body, already skeletal at the time of the rescue, seemed to wither even more. During the nights, Maria would wake with a start, terrified she would find him lifeless in the morning. "He'll pull through," Antonio assured her when he came to visit. "Animals like this have a lot of fight in them." But she could see the worry in her friend's eyes. The old woman's wrinkled hands trembled as she stroked the animal's head, remembering Anna and how her granddaughter had loved to care for helpless creatures. The silence of the house, broken only by Mateus's labored breathing, seemed to portend an outcome she refused to accept. "I won't let you go," she whispered into the dog's ear as night fell over the village. "I promised I would save you, and I will keep my promise." The storm fell upon São Bento do Mar like a heavy shroud, bringing with it gusts of wind that made the walls of the mud house groan. Maria Costa watched the thick drops of rain run down the window pane, while Mateus trembled in his corner, frightened by the thunder that shook the sky. When the lights flickered 3 times before going out completely, darkness swallowed everything, leaving only the occasional flash of lightning to illuminate the room. "There's no way to call João Pessoa tonight," Antonio Oliveira said, putting his cell phone back in his pocket after trying, unsuccessfully, to contact the veterinarian. "The storm has knocked out all the lines." Maria felt a knot form in her throat. She lit a beeswax candle she kept for emergencies and placed it on the worn wooden table. In the silence forced by the power outage, her thoughts drifted to Anna. How her granddaughter had loved the nights of the June festivals, running between bonfires with colorful ribbons in her hair, her face lit by the fireworks exploding in the sky. The longing tightened in her chest like an invisible hand. "He'll hold on," Antonio murmured, squeezing his friend's shoulder lightly before leaving, promising to return in the morning. Alone with the dog, Maria approached him with the candle in her hands. Mateus was lying on the old blanket, breathing with difficulty. The flickering flame cast dancing shadows on the walls, creating an almost mystical scene. The old woman knelt beside the animal, and began to pray softly, just as Donna Lourdes had taught her years ago. It was then, in that moment of intimacy forced by the darkness, that something caught her eye. A metallic glint, so faint it would have been impossible to notice under normal circumstances. Maria tilted the candle closer and saw it. Tangled in the fur of Mateus's front paw was a small, round medallion, caked in rust and mud. With trembling fingers, she touched the object. It didn't seem to be a simple trinket. It had engravings, though they were nearly illegible under the layer of grime. The old woman's heart began to race. This was no coincidence. The medallion suggested that Mateus had a history, perhaps a home, a family searching for him. "Who are you, really?" she whispered, stroking the dog's head as the rain continued to lash the roof. The animal opened his eyes for a moment, as if he understood the question. Maria felt a chill run down her spine. That small metal object, hidden beneath the mud, seemed to hold secrets that could change everything, not just for Mateus, but perhaps for all of São Bento do Mar. At dawn on the fifth day, Maria Costa noticed a new visitor on the porch of her mud-walled home. A tabby cat, thin but agile, was meowing insistently, as if trying to communicate something urgent. The old woman watched the animal for a few moments, before offering it a saucer of water. "You're worried about him too, aren't you?" Maria murmured, as the cat circled her legs. The feline then positioned herself strategically by the half-open door, her eyes fixed on the interior of the house where Mateus was resting. The dog, still weak, lifted his head slightly at the sound of the meow, but soon settled back onto the straw mat Maria had prepared for him. She noticed that, for the first time since his rescue, he didn't tremble at an outside sound. At night, the sounds of the coastal village created a peculiar symphony, a lullaby for the animal's recovery. The strong wind rattled the wooden windows, making the colorful fishing nets on the wall dance and cast mysterious shadows across the room. The distant roar of waves crashing against the rocks mingled with the occasional bark of a neighborhood dog, creating an atmosphere of anticipation that kept Maria alert. Seu Antonio Oliveira stopped by in the morning, bringing a little fish broth left over from dinner. "Maybe this will whet his appetite," the neighbor suggested, his eyes full of compassion. "Mateus is better. He can already get up on his own," Maria replied with a faint smile, using the name she had chosen for the dog for the very first time. With each new day, small signs of improvement appeared. First, it was the twitch of his paws, then an attempt to stand on his own. On the sixth morning, when Maria entered the room with her coffee, she noticed the dog following her with his gaze. Hours later, he tried to get up when he heard her voice calling him to eat. That evening, as she sewed by the light of an oil lamp, the power had been unreliable since the storm. She felt something touch her leg. It was Mateus. He had dragged himself across the packed earth floor just to be closer to her. His eyes, once dull with pain, now shone with a feeling Maria recognized immediately: gratitude. The tabby cat continued to appear daily, always watching from a distance, like a silent guardian. Donna Lourdes, visiting to bring more healing herbs, remarked that according to old beliefs, some animals could see protective spirits. "Does she see my Anna?" Maria wondered, as a silent, profound bond formed between her and the dog she had rescued from the water. The days dragged on in São Bento do Mar, each morning bringing the same intense smell of the sea that seeped into the earthen walls of Maria Costa's house. While Mateus slowly regained his strength, the village fought its own battle for survival. The news passed from mouth to mouth, as bitter as salt. The fishing cooperative, The livelihood of almost every local family was on the verge of closing its doors. They say the buyers have already signed the papers, commented São Antonio, watching Maria feed the dog some warm soup. If the cooperative is gone, I don't know what will become of us. Maria simply nodded, her gaze fixed on Mateus's still visible ribs. Every spoonful he took was a small victory she celebrated in silence. At night, when the wind grew stronger, she allowed herself to remember Anna. The memories came in flashes, her granddaughter running on the sand, collecting colorful shells, laughing with that crystal-clear sound that seemed to chase away any sadness. And then, the silence, a void that no noise could ever fill. I should have taken better care of her, she would murmur to herself, stroking the still thin fur of Mateus, who slept curled up on the patchwork rug. Guilt was an old companion, weighing on her chest like an anchor. At the weekly market, Dona Lourdes gave Maria an amber bottle. This one is to strengthen the bones, the midwife explained. My gypsy grandmother used to say, it works for people, as well as for animals. Maria realized that her fierce desire to protect Mateus was about more than just compassion. By fighting for the dog's life, she could somehow atone for her helplessness in the face of losing Anna. Every improvement he made was a small patch on her own broken heart. We're going to make it, she whispered to him that night, as news of the cooperative's possible closure kept the entire village awake. You're going to get well, and we're going to find a way to save this place too. The arrival of the biology students was announced by the rumble of an old engine. Maria watched from her window as 5 young people got out, carrying backpacks and cameras. A murmur quickly spread. They've come because of Donna Maria's dog. The students had read about the rescue on social media. They wanted to document not only Mateus's recovery, but also the impact the animal had on the community. Do you mind if we record an interview? Asked a young woman. Maria, initially shy, soon found her voice, her eyes shining as she described Mateus's progress. He's a walking miracle, she said, stroking his thin coat. The students' presence brought new energy to the village. But before they could begin their work, a storm descended without warning. Lightning tore across the sky as the sandy streets turned to mud. The power failed, plunging São Bento do Mar into darkness. It'll pass soon, Maria whispered to the trembling dog, unsure if she was calming him or herself. The next morning, the damage was clear. The town pier, vital for the fishermen, was covered in debris. Without a word, residents began to appear with buckets and brooms. São Antonio organized the work. José Santos brought tools to repair the damaged boards. The organic market, though battered, became a collection point. A handmade sign showed a simple drawing of Mateus, now a symbol of the community's resilience. It's incredible how one animal has changed us, remarked Father Olavo, organizing donations. We were neighbors before. Now we're family. When Maria arrived with Mateus, Dona Lourdes appeared with a steaming pot. Fish broth with herbs from my garden, she announced. To the joy of the crowd, Mateus lapped up every drop. It was the first time he had shown a real appetite. He's coming back to life, Maria whispered. With tears in her eyes, she felt that somehow her granddaughter would have approved. It was Dona Cecilia, the librarian, who first noticed something strange as she stroked Mateus's neck. Beneath the thin fur, her fingers felt a small, hard object. Maria, come look, she called. They carefully parted the fur, revealing a microchip. The discovery changed everything. Mateus wasn't a stray. He belonged to someone. 3 days later, the veterinarian read the device. The dog's name was Valente, and he belonged to Carlos Mendonça, a former town hall employee who had suffered a stroke months ago. He was in a care home, but his current whereabouts were unknown. The news left Maria with conflicting emotions. She was glad Mateus had an owner who loved him, but the thought of giving him back was a physical pain. He had become her family. As they tried to locate Carlos, worse news spread. The fishing cooperative was laying off 15 fishermen. A heavy silence fell over the residents. Maria looked at Mateus and felt the weight of her own helplessness. How could she care for him if she could barely support herself? That night, she whispered to him, "Maybe it's better for you to go back to your owner. You'll have a better chance there than here." The dog just looked at her with his deep brown eyes, as if he understood. Maria knew she was facing two impossible battles: finding Mateus's owner and saving her village. For the first time, she doubted she could win either of them. Then, a wave of insecurity hit São Bento do Mar. 3 boats had their motors stolen. Fishing nets vanished from the pier overnight. Tension grew as people looked for someone to blame. It was Marta Souza who first gave voice to the whispers. "Ever since that dog started barking every night, the tourists have been complaining," she said at the market. "No one can sleep, and visitors are leaving early." Maria's heart sank. Mateus had developed a habit of barking at the sea on nights with a full moon. It seemed as if he were responding to some distant call, one tied to his mysterious past. The murmurs grew louder when São Antonio reported that 2 couples had canceled their stay at his inn. They complained they couldn't rest with the dog's constant barking. The next morning, Maria found a note tacked to her door. "Control your animal, or we will find a more suitable place for him." There was no signature, but the words were enough to send tears streaming down the old woman's wrinkled face. Losing Mateus would be like losing Ana all over again. Desperate, she sought out João, the veterinarian, who suggested a natural calming aid. "We can't silence his instincts, Maria, but perhaps Dona Lourdes's herbs can help soothe him through the night." News that Mateus might be taken from Maria spread quickly. To the retiree's surprise, Pedro Lima appeared at her door with a clipboard and pens. "We're gathering signatures," the young fisherman explained, as Marta smiled by his side, "to show that most of us support you both." In 3 days, they collected 87 names. Even Father Olavo, known for his conservative views, signed the document, later declaring during his Sunday sermon, "This dog has brought more unity to our community than many of us have managed in years." José Santos, ever the practical one, installed a small fence around Maria's house, giving Mateus space to roam without disturbing the neighbors. "It's not the dog scaring away the tourists," the artisan remarked as he worked. "It's the thieves. And maybe Mateus is just trying to warn us." The community's mobilization not only protected Mateus, but also strengthened the bonds between the residents. Dona Cecilia, from the library, began to document the rescue in a handmade book, turning what could have been a source of division into a symbol of collective resistance. 3 months had passed since the rescue. The village of São Bento do Mar awoke one morning to the buzz of devastating news. Maria Costa was on her veranda feeding the dog, who was now showing clear signs of recovery, when Antonio Oliveira appeared, out of breath. "The mayor has announced the sale of the cooperative," he said bluntly. "Some heirs from out of town, people no one's ever seen, they sold the entire plot of land." The news swept through the wattle and daub houses like a fierce wind. The fishing cooperative was the economic heart of the community, sustaining dozens of families who depended on artisanal fishing. Without it, São Bento do Mar would become just another ghost town swallowed by progress. That afternoon, the fishermen gathered on the pier. Pedro Lima, his eyes welling with tears, spoke of how his father and grandfather had helped build this place. Beside him, Marta Souza held his hand in silent solidarity. The despair was as palpable as the sea spray. "We can't accept this," bellowed Jose Santos, slamming his fist against the weathered wood. "This cooperative is our history." It was then that Dona Cecilia, the librarian with graying hair and glasses perched on the end of her nose, arrived carrying a dusty volume. "I found something you need to see," she announced, carefully opening a document yellowed with age. It was a forgotten will, tucked away among the old books in the municipal library. The document, signed by the former owner of the lands, clearly stipulated that the cooperative's land could never be sold without the unanimous consent of the local fishermen. This could nullify the transaction, Dona Cecilia explained, adjusting her glasses. "We just need a notary's signature." As hope was rekindled, Maria searched through an old box in her house. Among faded photographs and treasured keepsakes, she found notes written by Anna, her late granddaughter. The childish handwriting made her heart ache. "Grandma, I promise to protect whoever looks after the animals," one paper read. On another, "The little animals are angels God sent to take care of us." Maria sat in the colorful hammock in her yard, Mateus lying at her feet. Anna's words seemed to guide every decision she had made since the dog's rescue. It was as if the girl, though gone, continued to guide her steps through that love for animals. That night, as the entire village mobilized around the discovered will, Maria stroked Mateus's now glossier coat and whispered, "You didn't just save yourself, my boy. You saved all of us." On a clear-skied morning, Mateus surprised Maria by insistently tugging at her cotton skirt, pulling her toward the beach. The dog, who 3 months ago could barely stand, now ran with renewed vigor across the damp sand. Intrigued, Maria followed, watching how his coat, once sparse and lifeless, now shone under the northeastern sun. "Where are you taking me, boy?" she asked, adjusting her straw hat as she tried to keep pace. Mateus would bark and then run back, as if to make sure she was still following. Nearing the cliffs that bordered the northern edge of São Bento do Mar, the dog vanished through an almost invisible crevice between the rocks. With her heart pounding, Maria hesitated. The area was known for rockfalls during high tide, but her trust in Mateus's instincts was stronger, and she crouched to pass through the narrow opening. Inside, the grotto was surprisingly dry. Shafts of light pierced through small fissures in the rocky ceiling, illuminating what appeared to be an old wooden box. Mateus sat beside it, wagging his tail as if presenting a treasure. "My heavens," Maria whispered, as she opened the aged chest. Inside, protected from the damp by a waxed cloth, were yellowed documents, maps of the village, and property records. Most importantly, there was a provincial decree from 1860 declaring the pier a strategic point for regional trade. When she returned to the village with the papers carefully wrapped, she went straight to the library. Dona Cecilia adjusted her glasses and examined each sheet with professional care. "This changes everything, Maria," the librarian said, her voice trembling. "These documents prove the pier and the cooperative area are part of our historical heritage. Legally, they cannot be sold for private development." Within days, the news spread. The Historical Heritage Institute sent representatives who confirmed the documents' authenticity. The mayor, pressured by the public outcry, was forced to annul the sale and officially declare the pier a protected landmark. The discovery not only saved the fishing cooperative, but also brought a new economic perspective. Tourists began visiting the village to learn about its centuries-old history, generating income for artisans like José Santos and fishermen like Pedro Lima. For the residents, however, the most meaningful change was seeing Maria transformed. The woman who once lived secluded in her grief was now recognized as a guardian of their collective memory. Her bond with Mateus had unearthed far more than documents. It had unearthed the very spirit of resilience and belonging that defined São Bento do Mar. But the village was beginning to understand that every small victory came at a price. José Santos spent 3 sleepless nights fixing the community well's water pump. The old lathe in his workshop, inherited from his father, groaned and protested until it nearly broke. "If I lose this tool, I lose my livelihood," the artisan confessed to Maria, rubbing his tired red eyes. Yet he didn't stop until water was once again flowing for the families. The vet, João, who had come from the capital specifically to check on Mateus, canceled his own birthday party. He spent hours applying medication to the still weak animal from supplies carried in his battered backpack. "My wife is going to kill me," he joked with a weary smile. "But some things just can't wait." Maria watched these sacrifices with an aching heart. Each act of kindness brought back memories of Anna and the promises she couldn't keep. Now, caring for Mateus, she felt she was honoring that interrupted love. The nights in her small home were long. The dog, though improving, still woke with a start, as if reliving the trauma of his past. The old woman would rise in the dark, whispering words of comfort until they both fell back asleep. At the cooperative, the fishermen rationed fuel, going out only on alternate days. "My father used to say you face a rough sea with oars rowing together," Antonio Oliveira would repeat at their meetings. Dona Lourdes brewed more medicinal herbs than ever, her wrinkled hands working tirelessly as she distributed them to anyone in need. What surprised Maria most was how these efforts, instead of draining the community, seemed to strengthen the bonds between everyone. Children helped carry water, and teenagers took turns feeding stray animals. Even Father Olavo opened the parish hall for meetings and fundraisers. "It's as if Mateus reminded us of who we truly are," remarked Dona Cecilia, the librarian, as she helped organize donations. Week by week, the sense of belonging grew. People who barely greeted each other now shared meals. Old disputes were forgotten for the sake of a greater good. As the dog regained his strength, the village rediscovered its own capacity to resist and reinvent itself. Maria, stroking Mateus's coat, thought that perhaps the real miracle wasn't just the animal's recovery, but the quiet transformation he had brought upon them all. Mateus's recovery brought more than hope. Pedro Lima watched in admiration as the village united, but his eyes shone brightest when he saw Marta Souza helping with the food drives for abandoned animals. Every afternoon, after hauling in his nets, Pedro would casually pass by the stall where Marta organized donations. His heart raced whenever she smiled with those eyes that reminded him of the calm sea on a summer morning. "I brought some fresh fish for Mateus," he'd say, holding out a bundle wrapped in a banana leaf. Marta would take the package, her fingers briefly touching his. "That's so kind of you. I think we're all learning from this story, aren't we?" Their walks along the beach, handing out flyers about animal care, became the perfect excuse for long conversations. Amid laughter and shared secrets, a feeling was born that not even the village's crisis could overshadow. Meanwhile, at the mayor's office, the atmosphere was tense. He paced his office, running his hands through his graying hair. Elections were approaching, and the documents found in the cave had complicated his plans. "Sir, The residents are gathered outside, his secretary informed him. They're demanding the pier be immediately declared a heritage site. The politician sighed. He had promised developers from the city the construction of a resort on that very spot, a project that would guarantee his re-election with generous campaign funding. Now he had to choose between his word to the investors and the cry of a community that, inspired by a simple dog, had rediscovered its own strength. That night, as Pedro and Marta shared their first kiss under the stars, with the sound of the waves as their witness, the mayor drafted an official document. His pen hesitated over the paper, the weight of his decision reflected in every word. The village that had mobilized to save a dying animal was now fighting for its own survival. And ironically, it was the rescue of Mateus that had sparked both a romance between two young people and the greatest political crisis São Bento de Mar had ever faced. Father Olavo Mendes walked thoughtfully along the beach, watching the horizon where the sky and sea merged into shades of blue. The changes in the village worried him. The faith that once seemed unshakable now competed with new values. But when he visited Maria Costa that afternoon, something deeply touched his heart. "He's eating better," Maria commented, stroking Mateus's now healthier coat. The dog, once near death, now rested peacefully on a sisal rug. The priest approached cautiously, and to his surprise, the animal didn't flinch. "It's as if he knows who comes with good intentions," the old woman explained, offering him a freshly brewed coffee. Olavo looked around the simple home, where old photographs shared space with herbs hung to dry. In that scene of simplicity, he saw what his sermons could no longer convey: true compassion in action. "You know, Maria," he confessed, holding the cup with both hands, "I see more faith in this one gesture of yours than in many of our grand processions." The world was changing, but the essential things remained. The coconut shell dances in the central square became more than just entertainment on warm nights. Between rhythmic clapping and singing, old rivals exchanged shy smiles. Antonio, who hadn't spoken to Jose Santos since a dispute over fishing nets, now worked side by side with the artisan on preparations for the São João festival. "The festivals have always been what unites us," remarked Dona Lourdes as she prepared a tea for Mateus. The midwife, with her time-worn hands, mixed herbs with almost mathematical precision. "My grandmother used to say that the plants are never wrong. The one who errs is the one who doesn't know how to listen to what she says." Maria watched intently, absorbing knowledge passed down through generations. The aroma of mint and rosemary filled the air as Lourdes spoke of her gypsy grandmother, who had crossed the northeastern backlands carrying only a bundle of clothes and a handwritten book of medicinal recipes. "She cured fevers in children when even doctors had lost faith," the midwife recounted, her eyes shining with the memory. "This tea will help Mateus regain his appetite and strengthen his bones." The dog, as if he understood, drew near and drank the warm liquid from a clay bowl. Maria smiled, remembering Anna's notes about protecting animals. That night, as bonfires were lit to celebrate the June saints, Father Olavo watched over the gathered community. The flames illuminated faces etched by labor and the sun, but also by a renewed sense of hope. In the center of the circle, Maria and Mateus were met with smiles and gentle pats. Perhaps, the priest mused, true spiritual renewal begins just like this, with a simple gesture of love for a helpless creature. The coastal culture shaped every aspect of life in São Bento do Mar. During the June festivals, as children ran between colorful banners, Maria Costa and Seu Antonio Oliveira organized craft auctions to raise money for medicine. The scent of sweet corn and canjica pudding mingled with conversations about saving the fishing cooperative, while Pedro Lima played his accordion, casting shy glances at Marta whenever she passed. In the processions that snaked across the sand, Father Olavo led the faithful in prayers for the protection of the fishermen and for the recovery of Mateus. The dog, now stronger, walked beside Maria, receiving affectionate strokes from the calloused hands of the villagers. Faith manifested in the details: colorful ribbons tied to boats, images of saints protected from the sea spray by plastic, promises whispered to the salt-laced wind. In the daily toil, these bonds grew stronger. José Santos opened his workshop before dawn, the sound of his lathe echoing through the village as he mended nets and harpoons. Dona Lourdes gathered herbs at dusk, storing them in carefully labeled glass jars, always setting a little aside for the treatment of the animal that had united them all. Cecilia, the librarian, organized donated books on veterinary care, creating a small section dedicated to the topic that now interested the entire community. The sea, imposing and mysterious, set the rhythm of their lives. When the waves were rough, the fishermen stayed ashore, using the time to repair equipment and share stories. When it was calm, they all rushed out to secure their livelihood. It was an obstacle in the storms that isolated the village, but also the source of life on days of abundant fishing. The coincidences surrounding Mateus found natural explanations as time went on. The rusty medallion found on his paw had been tangled there by the force of the sea currents, likely washed away from some fishing boat. The historical documents in the grotto were only discovered thanks to the dog's keen sense of smell, which picked up something the humans could not perceive. The community now referred to him as the hero of the village. Children drew his adventures at school, and Dona Cecilia recorded his story in a special notebook at the library. The animal that had arrived half dead, trapped in a plastic bottle, had become a symbol of resistance and unity for all the residents of São Bento do Mar. Mateus taught us that even in the most desperate situations, there is always a way, Maria would say, stroking the now shining coat of her companion as she watched the sunset paint the waters that had nearly taken him. On the hardest nights, Maria Costa allowed herself to feel the weight of it all. Her wrinkled fingers traced the rough texture of the soaked rope she had used to tie up the makeshift pier where Mateus could sunbathe. That coarseness reminded her of the first days of the rescue, when every second felt like an eternity. She would sit in the wicker chair on her porch and watch the sleeping dog. The animal, once skeletal, now had a healthier silhouette. When she petted his fur, Maria felt a comforting warmth beneath her fingers, living proof that something good had been born from so much suffering. Sometimes, when everyone else was asleep, she let silent, salty tears fall. The taste of the sea and of grief mingled in her mouth, reminding her of Ana and of all the losses she carried. Seu Antonio noticed this melancholy one afternoon. "You saved more than a dog, Maria. You saved all of us," the neighbor said, placing a hand on her shoulder before heading to the cooperative. But it wasn't all tears in São Bento do Mar. The community's festival brought colors and sounds not seen in a long time. The crackle of fireworks lit up the sky as Mateus, curious but no longer afraid, watched everything from his protector's side. Dona Lourdes had decorated the square with colorful flags made from scraps of fabric donated by everyone. In the community kitchen, the aroma of fresh basil mixed with the smell of cornbread. The women prepared treats while telling old village tales. Maria, for the first time in years, felt truly a part of that place. The children invented a game called Mateus's rescue, running on the sand with empty bottles they had collected from the beach. Instead of symbolizing danger, the objects now represented the awareness the dog's story had brought to them all. Pedro Lima took the opportunity to teach the little ones about marine preservation, always stealing discreet glances at Marta, who smiled as she watched him with the children. Jose Santos crafted a small wooden bell for Mateus to replace the old, rusty medallion. "So everyone knows he belongs here," the artisan explained, proud of his creation. Every small achievement, a new step for Mateus, a successful meeting at the cooperative, a tourist enchanted by the village's story, was celebrated as a collective victory. The vulnerability that once isolated each resident in their own suffering now wove them into a network of support that grew stronger each day. 6 months had passed since that cold morning when Maria Costa found Mateus among the rocks. What was once a skeletal dog, suffocating with a plastic bottle over his snout, now ran along the sand with renewed vigor. The transformation was not just physical. Mateus had become the living symbol of São Bento do Mar's resilience. The reconstruction of the fishing cooperative progressed through the community's collective effort. Men and women worked side by side, carrying lumber, painting walls, and mending nets. Sweat poured, but smiles remained. Seu Antonio Oliveira, even at 70, made sure to supervise every detail of the work, while Jose Santos applied his artisan's talent to the finishing touches on the new pier. "I never thought an animal could bring a village so close together," commented Dona Lourdes as she prepared tea for the workers. The midwife, with her time-worn hands, was now also the guardian of the stories of survival that had been born from the rescue. For Maria, every bark from Mateus was a reminder that life goes on, even after the most painful losses. The absence of Anna, her beloved granddaughter, still ached like an open wound, but now there was room for a new kind of love, a love that spread like the ocean waves, reaching every corner of the community. At the organic market, now a weekly meeting point, Pedro Lima and Marta Souza organized donations for abandoned animals. The young fisherman had found in the cause not only a way to get closer to the woman he loved, but also a greater purpose. "It was Mateus who taught us that no one is too small to make a difference," he would tell visitors. The veterinarian João, who had sacrificed so many weekends to oversee the dog's recovery, now brought students from the capital to see what he considered a miraculous case. Medicine explains the physical healing, but what happened here went beyond that, he explained to the curious young people. Dona Cecilia, among her dusty books in the community library, documented every stage of the journey. "We are writing history," the old woman would say, adjusting her glasses as she recorded testimonies. For Maria, the most meaningful thing was realizing how Mateus had become a bridge between a painful past and a hopeful future. When the animal lay beside her on cool nights, she felt that Anna, somehow, had sent this guardian to heal not only the village, but also her own broken heart. The compassion that began with a simple act of rescue had transformed into a force capable of renewing an entire community, proving that the deepest wounds can be healed when we allow ourselves to love again. The church bell rang at dusk, calling everyone to the newly renovated pier. Beneath an orange sky, Maria Costa adjusted the colorful scarf in her gray hair as she watched Mateus, now strong and proud, run ahead of her. Anyone seeing the animal today would never imagine that, months ago, he was fighting for his life, suffocating. The procession of the patron saints, an annual village tradition, took on a special meaning this year. Seu Antonio Oliveira carried the banner with pride, while Dona Lourdes scattered aromatic herbs along the path, purifying the way. The veterinarian Joao, who had given so much of his time to treat the dog, smiled as he saw his most famous patient leading the march with steady steps. "Look how he seems to understand the importance of this moment," commented Jose Santos, the artisan who had contributed so much to the community's reconstruction. His calloused hands, the same ones that had fixed the well pump, now held a small replica of the pier carved from raft wood, a gift for the community museum they would inaugurate that night. The mayor, once reluctant, now walked among the residents, carrying the official decree declaring the pier a cultural heritage site. The discovery of the documents in the grotto had changed not only the fate of the cooperative, but the entire history of São Bento do Mar. Dona Cecilia, the librarian, had organized an exhibition of old photographs of the village, including a newly discovered image of Dona Lourdes's gypsy grandmother arriving by boat decades ago. Children ran among the adults, some imitating Mateus's barks, turning him into the hero of their games. Pedro Lima and Marta Sousa walked hand in hand, their romance having blossomed amidst the struggle for the village's survival. The young woman carried in her arms the tabby cat that had so often cried on Maria's porch, now an inseparable part of the new family that was forming. Upon reaching the center of the pier, Maria felt a tear roll down her cheek. She thought of Anna and knew her granddaughter would be proud. The old woman placed the bottle that had nearly killed Mateus on a table. It was now transformed into a small garden of succulents, a symbol of how something destructive could become a source of life. "This is the story of all of us," Maria said, her voice thick with emotion. "Like Mateus, our village was suffocating, but together we found the strength to breathe again." Father Olavo raised his hands in blessing as colorful fireworks exploded in the sky. Mateus barked joyfully, as if he understood that this celebration was also his. São Bento do Mar was reborn, proving that when compassion unites a community, even the impossible becomes achievable.